Welcome back, and many thanks for staying with us on the #1 breakfast show in the country, Morning at NTV, with me, Romeo Busiku. Well, I'm now joined by Godbert Tumushabe. He is the Associate Director for the Great Lakes Institute for Strategic Studies. Yes, we are going to be having this conversation with him on the election, but before that, in 2019, December 10th, the Financial Intelligence Authority authored a letter addressed to the Director of Public Prosecutions calling for the freezing of accounts of two NGOs, that is the Uganda National NGO Forum and also the Uganda Women Network. These organizations are being accused of funding terrorist activities, but one of the civil society actors who came up in arms castigating government over this move, Godbert Tumushabe, said, how do you even leave the leaders of these NGOs whom are allegedly involved in these terrorist activities, and yet you're freezing the accounts? Wouldn't that put the lives of the people of Uganda in danger if the terrorists are allowed to move freely? So we do have Godbert Tumushabe right here in studio. We are going to be having or making sense of this conversation. He contends, actually in the literature I was reading, the civil society organizations contend that this money was meant for civic education, especially for UNIT. This money was meant to acquaint women with the information they needed for this electoral period that we have been going through. But as it is, the Electoral Commission told us on January 14th only some few voters showed up, like 9 million voters showed up. So that means 8 million voters did not show up to the polls. So that is the major contestation right now, because so many people are saying that could have been because there wasn't enough civic education on the part of the women to rally them to come out to vote fully, because the accounts of these organizations that are mandated to do the same were frozen. So I do have Godbert Tumushabe joining me right now in studio. Very good morning, sir.
Good morning, sir.
All right.
Yeah.
Have NGOs shifted from civic education to terrorist activities as contended by government?
No, I would really say that the actions of government, I would actually say the actions of the regime, because in this country you have a group of people who have captured and run the state, and they use the state to just to distort everything, to subvert the due process of the law. So the actions of the regime in this particular matter of freezing the accounts of non-government organizations, I think was not only reckless but also irresponsible, because I know I've worked with NGOs for the last over 20 years. I've run an NGO that has gotten a lot of funding, and many of us are disciplined people that all these organizations, their financial transactions run through the banking system. There is no any other way you get money that you'll go across the border and carry money in your bag the way the regime people do here. So if the regime wanted to know how much money Greece has received and how it has been spent, it's a straightforward matter that you can, even if they went illegally and accessed our accounts, they would know the funds that have been received. In this particular case, for the NGOs, they are required to file annual returns to the Bureau for Non-Government Organizations. So the government has the information. But what we've seen is really this group of people who runs our state, using the state infrastructure, the state apparatus, to harass people they suspected to be their opponents, to be opposed to them, to be empowering citizens to be able to make informed decisions about leadership issues. And so the target, you remember that the target of NGO Forum and Uganda Women's Network is because these two organizations were leading a coalition of organizations that were setting out to monitor elections. And because the regime was already in advanced stages of how to manipulate and rig the elections, they were then trying to disrupt any activity that would inform citizens on what to do as far as voting is concerned.
So you're saying that government was afraid that you were going to expose them on their vote rigging expedition, and that's why they had to close these NGO accounts?
That's really my reading of why they could do this, because I know the NGO Forum. They are our partner organization. They are actually our umbrella.
They oversee all the NGOs in the country,
They don't
the
oversee,
activities.
They coordinate. They coordinate activities. They know what's happening in the sector. I know Uganda Women's Network. We work with them quite a lot. They coordinate women's organizations engaged in all kinds of work, by the way, democracy and rule of law work, service delivery, women and community empowerment. They do all kinds of work that has been very instrumental in helping our people. So for any government that really counts itself worthy to be running after these NGOs, these are small organizations. They are not the big northern NGOs that you hear that run budgets in millions of dollars. These are really small Ugandan organizations where people are trying to make their own civic contribution as citizens of this country. So to have a government running around and of course using, I sympathize with these groups like FIA or Uganda Communications Commission, because these are organizations that are staffed by professionals, but who are also held hostage by the regime, because these institutions are then used as instruments to harass people. Because I know, for example, the guys whom I know work at FIA, they would have no business running around a small organization. Like Greece, our accounts were frozen in 2017 because we were among the NGOs campaigning against removal of age limit. So you find, you ask yourself, as an organization, a state agency like FIA running after a small organization like Greece that doesn't even run a budget of $1 million, there must be something fundamentally wrong with these people. So I sympathize with our colleagues who work with these agencies, because they are being used to do the wrong things to Ugandans.
Mr. Godber, could it be that the absence of civil society actors and NGOs involved in civic education in this electoral period, could it have been the reason why we saw a low voter turnout? 8 million women deciding to stay away from the polls.
Of course, it's one of the reasons. There are so many reasons. So many reasons, because you know the violence that characterized the campaigns. When you have high levels of violence, high levels of presence of security on the streets and in the rural areas, there's fear. There's an environment of fear that is created. There's an environment of doubt that is created, and therefore it's a combination of factors that then determine whether voters will go out and vote or not. But the absence of civic mobilization, I would even say not just civic education. These organizations like ours, they mobilize citizens to go and exercise their mandate. So the absence of civic mobilization by all these NGOs that have been harassed by the regime, right, left, and center, definitely is a major contributing factor to the low turnout that we've seen. And actually, one of the things that we want to do at Greece is to look at, to start to think of an idea of where do we find these 8 million voters that didn't show up? Because if you have a president elected by only 59, approximately
57%.
57% of the people who turned up. You can imagine if you calculate that percentage vis-a-vis the overall registered voters, you can see this is a president who is basically coming from the minority. So if 8 million voters turned up,
this election could have been the other way.
Of these candidates who maybe you could have been the candidate and you get your 8 million votes, you would be the president.
So could this have been the reason why they frustrated your efforts to ensure that there's a low turnout? Seems like that's what you're telling me. Low turnout makes it easier to rig the election.
You see, I have said time and again that President Museveni does not run an election. President Museveni runs a military operation. Elections, from the word go, they are a military operation. When you follow these events the way we follow them, you actually see the military written all over the place. There are cases reported, including my municipality of Ntunga, where soldiers came to one of the polling stations and started voting. Nobody knows them. These are armed people. Even you, as an agent of a candidate, you cannot question that, because the regime has used the military to really frighten everybody. And so I can tell you that these elections are run as military operations, and I think Ugandans need to understand that at the end of the day, we have to liberate the electoral process from the capture by the military and the regime to be able to say, my vote is respected is counted and is honored.
And of
Right
course,
now it
and of
doesn't
course, Mr. Godbert Tumushabe, what we saw yesterday in the division, in the municipal and city division elections, we saw that army officers were surrounding some polling stations. There's one near Makinde, military barracks. They surrounded that polling station and chased away all the polling agents. Is that the new normal that we are dealing with? Members of the armed forces engaging in partisan politics?
It's actually it's an escalation. We've known that the UPDF officers, and these are elements within the UPDF, have been consistently engaged in elections. In every elections, there are senior army officers that are deployed across the regions to be able to mobilize support for the president. And that has been coming up until we saw in 2016, when we saw the military coming out openly. This 2021 elections, it has been a brazen, overt appearance of the military in our elections. They basically took over the entire operation. And you know, there are stories, you only saw the ones in Kampala, but for us who have partners across the country, they give you all these stories of what has been happening across the country. So it's still the UPDF basically managing the elections and managing the outcomes of that election.
But what does that say about Uganda's democracy? Disintegrating?
Uganda has no democracy. You see, the democracy in this country has been reduced to an event of voting. Democracy is a process. Elections is a process. Elections should cover, like the Electoral Commission does, like, oh, we have launched the electoral calendar. This is a period that takes probably 1 year, no less than a year, to have a meaningful election. In our case, that process starts, and then the regime starts using all manner of security outfits to disrupt everybody who is contesting against the incumbent. And then then in our case, you saw the violence that broke out after the arrest of Bobby Wine on 18th and 19th. You know, you can't have an election where over 100 people are killed, where over 1,000 people are in jail, held incommunicado, and then you say, and then you go to the polls on 14th January, and because of the fear that you could get around the electoral process, people go and hide in their houses, and you go out just stamping how you have had a peaceful election. I think that Ugandans, we must really, these leaders need to count us some clever, that most of the things we understand them, some of us understand them, that you are using 8 hours of voting to judge the character of a process that has run for 1 year. You must that would be a certain new some level of new normal that is undesirable in a democracy.
Of course, on election day, some local electoral observers try to do their work. You also have the Citizens Coalition on Electoral Democracy. The Executive Director, Charity Ahimbi Sibe, was arrested. You also do have the Center for Constitutional Governance. Sarah Birete was also arrested on polling day. They were at Hotel Africana. They were doing some oversight. They're on Tally Center, and they were arrested.
Sarah was actually not arrested on that on that day. She was coordinating part of the team that was receiving information from the deployed election observers, but the entire team of data entry assistants, with 2 of our leaders, Perial Tua of Women Democracy Network and Isabella Kiteng of Femfort, they were arrested with our entire team, and they were kept in jail for close to about, I think, about 3 or 4 days. And I can tell you, you know, the effort that we had to put in to get them out of jail. And these are people who have been arrested for doing their civic duty. They are trying to make a contribution. The police is coming and say, this is a data center. And you get confused that even police officers cannot differentiate between a secretariat of an observation mission and a data center. You ask yourself, why did these guys go to school? Or are they actually doing it deliberately to disrupt? And when you try to engage with the Electoral Commission, you see in the Electoral Commission, you see everybody scared of handling the issue. So the degree of fear in this country from everybody is just frightening. And there is a philosopher who said that when the government fears people, there is liberty. When people fear government, there is tyranny. Now the problem with Uganda is that people and government fear each other. And so what you have is now the chaos that all of a sudden is resulting into unnecessary death and confining of people who are basically innocent people.
So in light of the frustrations on these local election observers who were doing their jobs on January 14th, what has been your official assessment of the just concluded parliamentary and presidential polls?
No, my assessment is that we didn't have an election.
Not you as Godbert Mushabe, but as civil society actors who have been handling these election observing missions.
No, for me, I can't speak for civil society because, you know, we have our mechanisms on how we communicate about this. But I give you my personal assessment as a researcher, as an analyst, and as a civic actor in this country, that I have argued time and again that we didn't have elections. Because elections have a standard. People are nominated. People are allowed to campaign. People compete on a level playing field. People express their liberty to choose. All these standards of an election were not met. The only thing we had now is one day where people just go to a polling station, those who could. I should tell you, so I come from Ntungamo. My polling station is called Kafunjo, Kafunjo Primary School. Now, because of security, because of the security assessment I had, I could not travel to go and vote because I considered the security risks to be high on my part. So I didn't travel. So
you're part of the 8 million who did not vote.
Absolutely.
All right.
Yeah, but I was up country until yesterday, and here are people in my village telling me how they did not vote, because by 10 a.m. I was told that some guy who is the Gombora intelligence officer came and asked, are there agents of ANT and NUP here? People said no. Then they said no. Then all these votes are for President Museveni. So they moved the ballot papers, sat in a room, ticked all the ballot papers for the president, for the woman MP, and for the MP. And finished the voting. So everybody who went after 10 at that polling station did not vote.
That's what actually the Secretary General of NOP, that is David Lewis Ngoya, told us on Monday.
Yes, exactly. And
they would show up and tell you voting for the president is over. It's only the parliamentary positions.
Yes. And I can tell you that the whole of that constituency called Rohama East, those are the stories that are told. There is a gentleman who was beaten thoroughly and injured at one of the polling stations. He was an agent for one of the independent parliamentary candidates. He went to the polling station, I think that's Chiora, to be able to follow up on the voting process. And before he could say anything, he was attacked by people from there and beaten up and injured. This is a young man who is a pharmacist working in Kabari. He had only come to do his civic duty. He was beaten. The case was reported to police, and he reported the people who beat him, but they are all at large. Nobody has been arrested. I'm sure if there were NUP supporters who beat someone, probably they would be somewhere in a safe house. So you can see the brokenness that we have in this country right now is quite frightening, and I can see that the anger that I saw in the village among the people who were denied their opportunity to vote, that anger cannot take us anywhere as a country. Eventually, bottled anger normally erupts. And we are beginning to see it in some of these incidences that we see. And I think this is the moment for President Museveni and his NRM people to step down and be able to appreciate that this country belongs to all of us. It's not an NRM country. NRM just came here yesterday, and they can only make a contribution. They can't change this country and take it over forever. I think at the end of the day, all of us need to sit together and be able to agree on how we move forward as a more stable and prosperous country.
I believe Emmanuel Dombo, the NRM Communications Director, would beg to differ. We'll get onto this conversation, more into it after this short break. Emmanuel Dombo is ready here. Welcome back to the #1 breakfast show in the country, Morning at NTV, with me, Romeo Busiku. We couldn't have the Secretary General, Kasula Lumumba, coming in on the show, but she delegated the Director of Communications, Emmanuel Dombo, to grace us with his presence to counter what Godwert Mushabe, the Associate Director for the Great Lakes Institute on Strategic Studies, has been saying right here on the show. So, very good morning, Mr. Dombo.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Busiku, and
Yes.
good morning, our viewers.
Glad you could make it once again on the show.
Oh, it's a pleasure that once again I'm here, and I wish to thank the management of NTV for continually giving us an opportunity and facilitating our transmission and interaction with the community.
Indeed. Now, Mr. Emmanuel Dombo, your candidate had a victory speech, but then it was riddled with complaints about why he lost the central region. Is that what victory should look like? Did you expect to do any better than the 58.6% that he got?
First and foremost, I want to thank the people of Uganda who voted NRM and all those who participated in the elections, because this is a civic duty which everybody should be proud to participate in. And I want to thank the Electoral Commission to have worked so hard and declare the results as they were, because I've had a number of people from the opposition, others praising the Electoral Commission, and others raising all sorts of concerns, including those from the civil society, like from my friend. But I want to tell you that for us, when you go to a garden and you plant food, there are always estimates which have been put by the scientists that when you plant 10 kilograms in an acre, this is the harvest that is likely to come out. And when you look at the flowering, when you look at the measures that you have put in, it is able to make somebody to predict with fair certainty what the likely outcome is likely to be. And besides that, we conducted an opinion poll, which was published in the New Vision 2 days to the elections.
And he got 50%.
And when you look at the outcome in the opinion poll and the outcome of what exactly happened on the voting day, is actually almost an
addition of 1 or 2 points.
Plus minus 2,
yeah.
It becomes the correct thing. So even when initially we expected to get 70 or so %, but the scientific way that we conducted as a party clearly points to the outcome that we eventually got. In Buganda, definitely, I want to tell you that we didn't expect to perform the way we did, because at least this is something that even when the opinion polls indicated that the support had a bit plummeted in some of the areas in the central region, it did not reflect that it would be as such the way it turned out to be. And for us, I've told you on this show before that whereas the president of Uganda, who is the president-elect under the NRM flag, has the opportunity to speak as a former candidate, and but he also speaks as the president of Uganda. And the president of Uganda has at his disposal a lot of information that we in the party are not privy to, because he's the commander-in-chief, he has the intelligence officers. There is a lot of information that is fed in. And for him, when he comes to speak, it is him who selects which information he must use in order to address a particular purpose and the intention of the communication that he wants to deliver. And so when he came to talk about the results soon after the elections in his victory speech, even yesterday when he spoke, he had such information which he used. But I want to tell you that in the central region, we should have performed much better, but we didn't. And we're going to find out whether is this a result of a free and fair election.
Well,
because every time, you remember the president, he spoke a few days to the elections, and he said, I hear some people planning to steal the election. You see, they have been stealing our election, and in some areas. So we are looking at all possibilities, but as of now, what has been reported by the Electoral Commission is
Besides vote rigging, Mr. Emmanuel Dombo, the president did mention sectarian voting. He said there was tribalism taking center stage in the Buganda region, and the voters decided to vote that way because of the leaders and the messaging that they were sending to the people in these areas. That's according to the president himself.
yes, that's the president speaking. Who am I to dispute what the president?
So is it really?
the president
Is
saying?
it vote rigging or sectarian voting?
What the president also did mention, we had an opportunity to have an interaction with him and in a meeting with the team from the Secretariat, and he specifically reminded us about what people were saying during the riots that took place in Kampala. They were laced with a lot of sectarian messages by people either who are releasing messages on clips saying these people with the, if it was not for these masks which help us to cover the noses, but we are saying that these people with the pointed noses, these people should go back to their respective.
Like one way,
They mine is very flat. You know, these people should go back. So something that could have bordered on inciting genocide in an area if it was not properly handled and controlled by the government.
Okay, here's what.
But also there were also messages by various individuals which could have mounted to this, and that is the message to which the president was responding.
But then we also do know that ministers Rosemary Seninde and Amelia Chambade came out to instead say the party needs some internal reflection. That she says that could have been the problem, the internal disgruntlements within the party. She said it's not sectarian voting. Amelia Chambade and Rosemary Seninde, they say it's just the situation within the party, internal disgruntlement.
Have you ever been at a murder scene?
Yes.
Or burying somebody who has died, and these people are mourning. And how does the police treat the bereaved when they cry and make all sorts of allegations during the funeral?
So Rosemary and Amelia are crying because they lost.
So these are people who have just lost an election. It is painful to lose an election. I have been in an election and I've had victory, but I've also seen what it means losing an election, and it is even worse losing it unfairly. So somebody who has lost an election and he comes out with a reflection, nobody has done a thorough analysis of why the people of Uganda or Central Region have voted the way they did. There are a number of reasons. Those are some of those that mentioned by the president that are going to be looked into. Some of those mentioned by the people who have been participating directly in the elections. And some of those that nobody has talked about, which will require us to do specific investigation to find out what message is it list. Because when you look at performance, there are people who have openly performed so well. So was it performance? Look at a person like my senior brother, Onarumiingo. If there is any person I've been admiring when I look at the works that he conducts, even when our team went to do, when our team went to conduct the opinion poll, they really put Onarumiingo so high because of what had been conducted. But there was some concealed message which the opinion poll couldn't bring out, but then which appeared to affect the conduct of the elections. Well, so this wave, we did find out, is it a demographic dividend, which our brother Honorable Buwain we rode on, or is it sectarian voting, like others have alleged? Is it the influence of the church? But also some of the things like we shall find out.
All right, we have a researcher, Godbert Mushabe. Maybe he will interest us with his views. Mr. Godbert Mushabe.
I wish he could conduct a research and he publishes his findings.
What are your findings on the loss of the NRM in the Central Region?
Such a research.
We are going to definitely for our research. We actually did a comprehensive public perception survey sometime in November, immediately after the nominations. Our studies are more to inform public policy, so we normally don't try to coincide them with elections, because normally elections have, there are so many passions that come. So we are in the process of concluding the analysis. So that report will come out, but that, because we do regular public perception surveys, so probably later in June, July, we'll be doing another one, and some of these facts will come up. But I just wanted to reflect on about three things, some of them that Emmanuel hinted on.
Right.
One is that I think that President Museveni needs to come to terms that he's part of the sectarian debate. Because remember that NRM came to power in 1986. If I remember correctly, in 1988, that's when the NRC enacted the anti-sectarian legislation.
Yes, today.
Yeah, 1988. Now, if more than 3 decades later, more than 2 decades later, to be precise, you are still complaining about sectarianism, that means that you are admitting government failure to deal with the problem because the law is there. So what is the problem? And so the president needs to come to terms. And actually, it's very, very frustrating because if you follow him, because I follow each of his addresses, because for us in the policy, we don't take words of policy makers and leaders lightly. Even Emmanuel Dombo, in his position, when he speaks, I am interested in what he's saying, but I'm also interested in his body language. Of what does he actually mean what he's saying? So President Museveni, in the last 1 year, no, actually in the last about 10 years, his talk on sectarianism has been so consistent that it is now it's now difficult to find any speech which he gives and he does not talk about sectarianism. And as a policymaker, you actually give sectarianism a voice by repeating it, and you're not solving it. Secondly, if you listen to his speech, just before that, I think in the 1 week around the elections, President Museveni addressed the country 3 times. And in each of those 3, he was putting on his military jacket. And Museveni's military jacket communicates his posture. I can tell you that in these 5 years, Museveni's posture in terms of dealing with Ugandans is going to be military. So you're going to see more military engagement, more military presence in our politics and civic life than we've seen before, because that he could communicate.
It's like, Mr. Godberto Mushabe, it's like you're saying Mr. Yoweri Museveni has been unable to shed off the origins of the NRA.
Absolutely. In fact, if you've been following again, you realize in the last, since 2016, he rarely refers to our military as UPDF. He refers to it as NRA. Now, that has significance in terms of how, in terms of the mind of the leader, at the level of president, at the level of commander-in-chief. So for me, who is interested in what is the president likely to do, how is he likely to do it, what is his posture, I look at his dress code, I look at his language, and I can predict that these next 5 years is going to be military, military, military.
But Mr. Godberto Mushabe, if I take you back to 1980, according to some political analysts, President Museveni has been fighting against sectarianism since 1980, because before he founded the Uganda Patriotic Movement, there were calls for him to join DP or UPC. But according to President Museveni, DP was majorly Catholics and UPC was majorly Protestants. And for him, he wanted to found a party that did not toe any religious lines. Yes, so he founded Uganda Patriotic Movement to invite all Ugandans.
Uganda has many religions.
Irrespective.
There are Muslims, Seventh-day Adventists, there are other regions. So where do they belong? I think that talk, I think it's actually petty talk. Because people, first of all, nobody should make any apologies for having an identity. Yeah? I'm a Munyankole Ugandan. I can't apologize for being a Munyankole. Nobody should apologize for being a Muganda. I don't think that President Museveni should apologize for being a Munyankole. That's an identity. Identities are important. They are organizational. They are organizational. When there is public policy failure, when the government fails, when it doesn't deliver development, people retreat to their identities to be able to negotiate for whatever they can get. That's why President Museveni acknowledges this in his actions. Although he doesn't in his words. In his actions, he acknowledges, because that's why he's been able to endorse the dismantling of this country into many tribal districts. Or ethnic, actually not even tribal, ethnic districts. Because if it was not for that, you've heard President Museveni talk in speeches and say, these people they are marginalized by the other ones, and these ones are marginalized. The marginalization is based on ethnic identity. So he needs to come to terms that we are an ethnically diverse country, and those ethnicities are important. These religious affiliations are important. You organize and mobilize them and use them for transformation. To just be there, ridiculing everything. We've been looking at the results. Bobby Wine was voted 75% in Luwero. In Uganda here, I think actually average in Uganda is about over 70%. President Museveni got about 88% in Ankole. So does that mean that, how is it possible that the Baganda are tribalists for voting Bobby Wine and we the Wanyankore are not tribalists for voting Museveni? I think that discourse is totally unnecessary. Government needs to sit down and see where are the public policy failures. How do we reinvigorate the population? How do we deliver development so that people are more engaged in doing the right things? As I said, marginalization immediately invokes ethnic sentiments and other forms of identity, because those are the fights. By the way, for me, I believe that this country, the future of this country, is going to have to be negotiated between Uganda's 15 nationalities. Because Karamoja is a nation. Buganda is a nation. Ankole is a nation. We all need to sit together and agree on how we promote this project called Uganda. Because Uganda is a project where we all found ourselves geographically.
How about the Banyole?
The Banyole, they must belong to some nationality as well. If they have their own nationality, they should come on the table. We should all be sitting together, because this idea that some group of people called NRM are the only ones who know what Uganda wants, what is good for Uganda, I completely object to it.
Emmanuel Dombo, the president has accused the opposition of sectarianism, but what Godbert Mushabe is telling us seems like it's the other way around, that the president has been the biggest instigator of tribalism and sectarianism in the country. What's your take on that?
The president has a lot of information about the historical perspective of how the country has evolved from the colonialists and how different nationalities have behaved over the years, and how previous leaders have subjugated some of the people to discrimination because of either their ethnic or their geographical location. You have seen what happened between the Bakonjo and the people of Fort Poto and the Batoro. You have not seen what has happened between the Banyole and the people of Tororo. When the poor leaders, I'll give you an example why the president has been supporting some of the things. When Bloated was constituted together as a district, it was referred to as the United States of Uganda, because we had the Banyole, Bagwere, Japadola, the Iteso, and other small minorities. And Bloated could only stand together when those tribes were together, because within themselves they had a formula of converging and coalescing either as Bantu or Nane-Bantu when they were in the district council. And the language of speaking was Luganda. During the presidential campaigns, which has just ended, I was the one coordinating the Bloated. Bloated is the only venue where the president was forced to address the delegates only in one language, in English. He could try to mix some Swahili, but the people in the district said, if you must translate in Lunyoli, you must also translate in Lugwere, because the people of Budaka were part of it. And they said, the Japadola said, if you translate in Ateso, then you must also translate in Japadola. Now, because of that, there was a consensus that let us use English. But how many people listen to English? There are many people in the villages who are listening to the president on TV and on radio who could not understand English. But because of those challenges that we have had in the past, that is why the president would say, let communities organize themselves in areas and in circumstances that they can communicate amongst themselves. But looking at the performance of the NRM and how NRM voted, there are a number of partners we could look at. And the other day I was joking with somebody. I said, when they removed Honorable Sekandi, he was beaten by Muganda. When many of the people in Central Region who were removed or who were defeated, they were defeated by their likes. They were the people from the Central Region. I don't know the tribes of many of them, but that wouldn't definitely have been that wouldn't have been sectarianism. But the nomenclature and the narrative of many people and many leaders, the ones that they speak matter. Godber has just told you that when he's listening to a communication by anybody, he also looks at the individual and what he says. It does not only matter because it is the president, but also it matters whether it is in church, whether it is in a traditional institution, or whether it is a family and it is the children listening to the father or the mother. They take into consideration the body language of the father speaking to them. They take into consideration the body language of the mother speaking to them. So that body language which you studied from President Museveni, it also must be studied by other people who have an opportunity, who have an influence in the community society. How do they speak and what exactly is it that they are trying to achieve?
Yes.
But like I said, there have been a number of issues which have come up in these elections. And we did not want to limit them to only religious and tribal sentiments as to have been the basis for the determination. Yesterday on one of the major broadcasters in Uganda here, I saw Narabo Seninde trying to reflect with her voters, and a number of issues were raised in that meeting. I thought this is a good soul-searching meeting, but worse as an NRM, we shall need to do more, and not now, over time, in order to establish what exactly the voters were communicating. And once we are done, definitely we shall come up with an informed position. But
all right, gentlemen, let me take you back to 1971 to 1985. Those are periods when sectarianism was actually trailing very high. The Amin regime, yes, the Acholis were actually taking over most of the positions. Now, in the Obote II regime, it was the Langese and the other way around. The crumbling of the Amin regime was because of that kind of tribalism and sectarianism. Fronting Acholis They were Acholis mainly in the Amin regime. Now, in the Obote regime, it was mainly the Langese who were the officer cops, and then the Acholi were the foot soldiers. So those were the complaints that led to the disgruntlement and then the fall of those two regimes. So would you say that the NRM regime has actually survived because it is non-sectarian?
I actually think that the NRM regime is the most sectarian of the three. I've done some work around this. There is a gentleman who has written a book. I need to recall it's the title. But if you look at a paper I wrote around 2006, 2007 on public administration expenditure and the cost of the executive, I was looking at what is it that that explains why a government that came into power, or a team of people that came into power wanting to create an efficient government, ended up with a bloated executive, a bloated parliament, and a bloated everything. And all that can actually be traced to sectarianism, either ethnic or religious and other forms of sectarianism. Because right now you have about, I almost at some point I stopped counting, but you probably have about 80 ministers. Quite often the president comes and gives ministries based on these ethnicities, based on religious affiliations. Then you have the creation of all these administrative and political units. That's why our parliament has increased from about 200 members around the late 1980s. No, about 1980, we're about 200.
From the 80s.
Up to about 530 now. The parliament.
527.
Yeah, 527 now. Now, to be honest, Emmanuel has been in that legislature. You know that Uganda doesn't need all these busybodies to be able to legislate and run this country well. What I have heard President Museveni and NRM people say is that they need to placate certain constituencies, they need to create ethnic balances. Now, that is what sectarianism is about. And I have no problem.
Is it sectarianism or gerrymandering?
No, you see, you gerrymander to be able to address sectarian interests. And I've said that, in my view, a president who is laser focused on development and transformation, you can actually formulate and implement policies that deliver development, that create opportunity, that you make a people focus more on business. In this country, the biggest business right now is politics. And the moment you have business running, the moment you have politics running business and not the other way around, as a country, you are definitely on the wrong track. And I can say without any fear of contradiction that this country is on the wrong track. As long as you have the politicians, the politics playing the main business. People kill each other to be in that parliament. People sell property to be chairpersons of LC3 or to be councillors. And you ask yourself, but these are people who are supposed to be doing work and creating wealth and, but they are fighting to chair to be in these positions. So really, Emmanuel, you need to, I know you are influential in your party. You need to be helpful. Some of you need to help this country and probably help NRM to say, this country is bigger than NRM. It's bigger than Museveni. It's bigger than Bobby Wine and all these politicians.
Go back to Mushabe. According to some political analysts, we cannot compare the NRM regime to the regimes that were before, the Amin regime and the Obote regime when it comes to sectarianism.
And that is the reason.
No, they are actually comparable in everything. They are comparable in everything because the NRM regime has lived so long to be on every side of every issue. Whether it's sectarianism, the evidence is there to see. Whether it is killings, you are seeing it openly now. People being executed on the streets. Sometimes people like Amin, they would arrest and kidnap and disappear. These ones execute on the street, they kidnap, they execute.
But in the Amin regime, Mr. Godber Mushabe, the first year, 1971, 100,000 people were killed. Educationists, teachers, lawyers.
In 1980 to 85, where NRM was a participant, more than 800,000 people were killed.
At the hands of the Uganda National Liberation Army?
No, on the hands of
the Obote regime
Liberation Army and NRA, because this was a conflict. And you remember they just even celebrated this day, the 26th.
Yesterday, yes.
Yesterday. I have argued time and again and say, where have you seen a country where people celebrate for killing each other? Because all the wars that we have fought and people have died, they have been internal wars.
Christians,
one group fighting another.
Christians celebrate over the death of Jesus Christ.
Yeah, but they are not because you can't compare that with the country. I'm saying here is a country where we are the same.
Mr. Busiku,
go ahead, Mr.
Busiku.
Yes, no.
And then they are all celebrating.
What do you make of this?
Mr. Busiku, Godber is entitled to his views. But I want to tell you that even he himself, I don't know, because he's a person who conducts public policy research. These are some of the things he should do, help us to conduct public policy on. And then he publishes. Because you have never been a president of Uganda, and I have never. So what you feel and the challenges that you face as a president are best addressed or felt or talked about when you're in that perspective. But when you look at the president and the members of parliament, I don't think they are mad people when they sit in parliament of Uganda and take decisions to demarcate the constituencies, to increase the administrative areas because of the challenges that are available. It's not because the people who take these decisions already have constituencies, not that they are creating constituencies for themselves. But there are legitimate challenges on the ground, and even if you ask the people who are being led in those respective areas, they will demonstrate that these are the needs. Some of the issues which have been brought up to the president are raised either in public meetings with him, with the leaders, or in public rallies for people to cry out. And when he looks at the legitimate issues when the people cry out because they cannot address the issues that concern them. The public policy researchers who are seated in the comfort of the offices in Kampala and earning a pay right from because of the reports they write, they'll want to use all sorts of arguments which are totally different from the reasons why the president or the parliament of Uganda may take decisions
Can I
to...
ask you a question?
Please ask.
Yeah, so I come from Ruhama. Until last year, Ruhama was one constituency. Ruhama is ethnically uniform. So, in other words, there is no, I don't think that there are any ethnic sentiments that this group wants to be and here. In the last creation of constituencies, Ruhama was divided into two constituencies. The only reason that was given was, one, that it was too big.
That is a legitimate reason.
But it has sub-counties. The sub-counties, if you are running effective sub-counties, you can run even a district without an MP. Because what does an MP do for a constituency other than going and legislating and meeting people and mobilizing them? What do you do? So the idea that some of these areas are too big, we cut them.
The second question, because you interrupted, I was talking.
Oh, yeah.
The second question, because you asked me a question. So, the issues that the president raises when he's in charge of running the affairs of the country totally depend on the challenges that he faces, the research that he also conducts using his apparatus, but also the interactions with the leaders in those respective areas. And I'll give an example of Butaleja, like we said. When we were in the district council of Tororo, and the people decided to conduct a council meeting in Japadola, and I don't understand any word apart from yoga in the Japadola, and some chairman of a district is conducting the affairs of council in Japadola, and people are responding, and all you can do is to witness. Now, by creation of Bunyole Butaleja district, it gave an opportunity for people who stay in Butaleja to be able to sit in their district council and deliberate on the matters. Even if you brought a, I will not use the word half-baked. even if you brought a half-baked person who is as a district councillor, he can be able to communicate and address the issues, because the issue is not the level of education, but the ability to communicate like our people used it to. And you administer an area depending on the resource, the human resource, and also the financial resource that you have. These are challenges which, unfortunately, Godiba will look at them totally differently from the person who is in the engine and is a politician with the
all right, there is another case that is simmering. You have two vice chairpersons who in the NRM who are vying for the speakership race in Parliament. Will you give a chance to Ugandans for these two to actually lobby and campaign for these two positions? Will we get that chance?
I thought that's what has always been.
Usually they go to the SEC and they solve those issues from there.
No, initially, before they even get to SEC, the people themselves vying first must express their interest. And they only express interest, one, to the people who are going to vote, the members of parliament who have been elected, but also to the administrative organs. Because when you have parties in a country, parties have a way on how they are run. Multi-party democracy and dispensation has caucuses. And even if it was a family level, when your father dies, in order to pick a heir, there must be a structure through which either it is the sisters who sit, or it is the brothers, or the clan leaders who must identify on how an organization or a family is going to be run. So for us in the NRM, we have the Central Executive Committee with the delegated powers and authority in order to run the affairs of the party on a regular basis. And so we strongly believe that the people who want to vie for any leadership position
Olanya
within the NRM,
we're talking about Olanya and Kadaga.
I've not heard them physically say so, but because they're human beings and they already occupy these positions, I have all reasons to anticipate that they may be amongst those people running. But I also know that there are many people who have been elected, and we shall need to find out whether there are other people who may want to vie.
Indeed.
So this is a civil method of identification of leadership.
Indeed.
And when the NRM does it or uses it, it does not offend agreed the principles
In the-
or
Away from the power jostling within the NRM party, we also do know that there was some power jostling within members of the opposition. Moving into this election, Mr. Godbert Tumushabe, there was talk of a united front against President Yoweri Museveni. The front runner was clear. I can mention the name, Robert Kyagulanyi. That was the front runner for this united front as a presidential candidate from the opposition to take on President Museveni. But then what we saw was the DP, ANT, and all these other political parties, FDC, choosing to go their other way. The disgruntlement, why did it not happen? Why did this idea of choosing one front runner not culminate into anything?
No, you see, I was at the forefront of joint opposition politics in 2016.
I remember.
Yes, I was at the center of, formulation and management and moving of TDA. I think that was one major attempt at trying to get a joint presidential candidate and mount a joint effort. The effort failed, but the idea definitely survives. So one of my biggest lessons I learned from that process is that the brokenness of our politics affects every group almost in the same measure. It affects NRM, it affects FDC and ANT and NUP and everybody. So we have a broken political system. Politicians often try to make judgment and move on the assumption that you have a functioning multi-party system. So in other words, the rules of the game are clear. There is a state which regulates our political activities. So that is the assumption. Unfortunately, we are in a very, very sophisticated dictatorship where the ruling group called NRM has fused with, actually not even fusing, the ruling group called NRM has captured the state institutions. It captured the military, and in fact, in this election, you could see that even the radical groups around these groups, NRM and opposition, is now rearing its head in the military. That you can also see the radical elements within the military. That is the frightening situation that we are in as a country. So when you talk about joint opposition, you don't want to assume that there is a level playing field where there are political parties that are playing. Each of these groups, whether it's ANT, NUP, FDC, each one of them is competing against the state of Uganda. It's not competing against the political party called NRM. Because
All right.
that group basically has captured the state. It controls the military, it controls the police, it controls the money, it controls everything. So if you are on the opposition and you don't appreciate that you need to mobilize Ugandans to disengage this cabal that has captured the Ugandan state, and that you and me as citizens, and Emmanuel, that as citizens we appreciate that, in a situation that we are seeing now where a group of people called NRM have captured our state and can use state institutions to distort everything, then you are not appreciating the depth of the crisis that we are in.
All right, gentlemen, we've run out of time. I would like to get your parting shots, starting with Emmanuel Dombo. We have the president offering a reconciliatory tone yesterday, an olive branch to the opposition. But then the NUP leader, Robert Kyagulanyi, said, no, my MPs do not work with the president. Are we back to the gridlock in the Besigye era? The same gridlock?
I think if it is true, that's what Kyagulanyi said, it only demonstrates that he is still an amateur, and he is yet to understand how parliament works, where he has been only for 2 years. Because the parliament which was elected was the parliament of Uganda. And the laws that are going to be made and the policies that are going to be passed by parliament, they are the policies they are the policies of Uganda, and they are not policies of NUP. And for us, the words of the president is basically just reiterating what he has always been. Because when you look at the constitution and composition of NRM, it is composed of people who have been fighting him. It's composed of people he has fought against. And people who have said all sorts of things. But in order to marshal the country together, he had to bring them together in order to run the affairs of the country.
Thank you very much.
So, Kyagulanyi is very free to come and have a discussion. But also, when his team gets to parliament, it must work together as a body, members of parliament, because now they have become part of the government. by them being elected NUP members of parliament, they are part of government, only that they will be sitting on the opposition within government.
All right, Emmanuel Dombo, parting shots from you, Mr. Godber, 30 seconds. We've run out of time.
For me, I think that with the election of President Museveni and NRM, it's more of the same. I don't expect any fundamental changes in the way the government runs. I actually expect, more gridlock. I think what I would really plead with Emmanuel and others in NRM to say, President Museveni does not have to extend the olive branch to Bobby Wine. He needs to be to offer leadership to the country, to climb back and be able to think on how we move forward as a country, because I don't think that the issues that we are faced with are issues of Museveni and Bobby Wine.
And on that note, we've come to the end of this show. Many thanks to Emmanuel Dombo and Godbert Mushabe. Yes, my name is Romeo Busiku. A joyous birthday to all the kings, queens, boys and girls who are celebrating their birthdays on this particular 27th day of January. My name is Romeo Busiku. Let's do this again tomorrow, same time. Good morning.